Dan, if you know what's good for you, you won't ask my sister about her career." The words were loud, and Charlie made sure of it. She leaned back in her chair at the ridiculously expensive restaurant in downtown Denver, flashing a smile that was all teeth and practice. The general hum of silverware on plates and murmured conversations around us seemed to just melt away. All I could hear was her voice, echoing in the space. My mother, Helen, didn't tell her to be quiet. She just took a long, deliberate sip of her Chardonnay. My father, Robert, busied himself by adjusting his glasses and staring intently at the white linen tablecloth, a master of pretending he was somewhere else entirely. This was our family's well-rehearsed play. Charlie was the leading lady, and I was the comic relief, the punchline. I felt that old, familiar heat of shame creep up my neck. For my entire life, I had swallowed these little daggers. I had let them all believe the story they wrote for me, that I was lost, unsuccessful, and just wasting my life away. Charlie was looking at me with undisguised pity, waiting for me to drop my gaze. She expected me to wilt, to crumble, just like I always had. But not tonight. I held my expression steady, a mask of calm. I took a sip of my water and met her gaze directly. She had no clue that the man sitting right beside her, her own husband, was a ticking time bomb about to blow our little world mulhairs. Before we get into the explosion, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know. To really get why that moment in the restaurant was a breaking point, you need to understand the life I lived before it. You need to understand the suffocating silence I existed in. My sister Charlie has been the center of our family's universe for as long as I can remember. This isn't a new development. It's a dynamic that was set in stone back when we were kids. Charlie just had this energy about her, you know? She was the loud one, the one who drew every eye in the room the moment she entered. The whole atmosphere would just bend around her. I, on the other hand, was the opposite. I was quiet. I was the observer, the steady one. In a family like ours, being quiet was the same as being invisible. My mother, Helen, absolutely adored the spotlight, and she got her fix by living through Charlie. If Charlie got a blue ribbon for a school art project, my mother would have it professionally framed and hung over the fireplace. If I aced a university-level physics exam, my mother would offer a distracted, "Oh, that's nice, Alex," before immediately turning back to Charlie to talk about her new haircut or Vrinden. I learned very early that my accomplishments were just different. They felt dense and uninteresting. Charlie's accomplishments, no matter how small, were sparkly and light. As we got older, the canyon between us just got wider. Charlie became a full-blown influencer, long before that was a title people took seriously. She was surgically attached to her phone, constantly curating her existence, posting pictures of her brunches, her outfits, her exotic trips. She's undeniably beautiful, and she knew exactly how to market that beauty. My parents just lapped it up. They'd boast to Njihovi Prishatelia about Charlie's follower count. They discussed her brand partnerships as if she were the CEO of a global corporation. "She's a born entrepreneur," my dad Robert would say, his chest puffed out with pride. And all the while, I was building something real, but I was doing it in complete silence. For me, it was always about how things fit together. I was fascinated by processes, by figuring out the weak points in a system and making it stronger, more efficient. While Charlie was learning camera angles, I was teaching myself to code. I was learning to solve the kinds of complex problems that most people didn't even know existed. 3 years ago, I took the leap and founded my own company, Apex Digital Systems. It wasn't some little hobby or a side hustle, which was Charlie's favorite dismissive term for anything I was working on. It was a legitimate systems consulting firm. I launched it from my tiny apartment with nothing but a used laptop and an industrial-sized coffee maker. I didn't ask my parents for a dime. I didn't ask them for their advice. I just did the work. The beginning was brutal. I was pulling 18-hour days, living off instant mac and cheese because every spare cent went right back into the business. I was in a constant state of exhaustion, but I was also truly happy. For the first time in my life, I was building something that was entirely mine. I wasn't just Charlie's little sister. I was Alexandra Pierce, the founder. By the second year, Apex Digital Systems exploded. I brought on my first 5 full-time employees. We moved out of my apartment and into a real office downtown, a sleek space with glass walls and a view of the mountains. We started landing major contracts with established local companies. My personal bank account began to look like a phone number. I bought a nice condo, nothing extravagant, because I never felt the need to be flashy. But here's the kicker, the truly sad part of it all. My family knew absolutely nothing about this. To them, I worked with computers. That was the full extent of their knowledge and their interest. I'll never forget this one Sunday dinner, maybe 6 months after I landed our biggest client to date, a contract worth $750,000. I was bursting. I was so proud I wanted to shout it. I just wanted for once to see my father look at me with the same pride he had for Charlie. I sat at that dinner table, just waiting for a gap in the conversation. "So, Charlie," my mom said, buttering a piece of bread, "tell us all about that trip to Bali. Did the hotel really sponsor the entire thing?" And off she went. Charlie launched into a 20-minute monologue about the perfect lighting in her bungalow and the endless supply of free cocktails. My parents were completely mesmerized, hanging on every single word. They asked follow-up questions. They laughed at all the right times. When she finally paused to take a sip of wine, I saw my chance. "I actually had a really great week too," I said. My voice sounded so small in that room. I just signed a massive new contract for my business. My dad glanced at me, blinking, as if he just remembered I was sitting there. "Oh, that's great, sweetie. Is that for your computer thing?" "Yes," I said, my hopes rising. "It's a consulting firm. We help companies streamline their—" "That reminds me," Charlie interrupted, slapping her hand on the table with excitement. "I need to streamline my posting schedule. Dad, do you think Sunday evenings are better for engagement, or should I stick to Monday mornings?" And just like that, I vanished. My dad turned his full attention back to Charlie. "Well, Monday mornings, people are on their commute, so maybe—" I just sat there, staring at my plate of cooling pot roast. The $750,000 contract I was so proud of just dissolved in my throat. This happened again and again. Eventually, I just gave up. I realized they didn't want to hear it. They had a neatly packaged version of me in their minds. Alex, the quiet one. Alex, the one who was struggling. Alex, the background character. If I told them I was actually succeeding, it would shatter their neat little narrative. It would be confusing, or worse, they'd think I was lying or exaggerating. So, I let them believe what they wanted. I let them think I was barely getting by, a freelancer picking up odd jobs here and there. It was a constant, dull ache in my chest, but it was easier than fighting for a scrap of attention they had no interest in giving me. The only person who ever looked at me with a shred of genuine curiosity was Dan. Dan Vaughn was Charlie's husband. He was a genuinely good guy, an engineer, whip-smart, logical, and kind. I could never quite figure out how he ended up with someone as self-absorbed as my sister, but I guess opposites really do attract. Or maybe he just had a thing for needing to be needed, and Charlie needed a whole lot. Dan was the only one who asked me real questions at family functions. While my parents and Charlie were chattering about social media drama or neighborhood gossip, Dan would ask me about trends in the tech industry. He'd ask about specific software. "You seem to know a lot about back-end infrastructure, Alex," he said to me once at a 4th of July barbecue, holding a beer. "More than you'd expect a freelancer to know." I'd just smiled and given a vague answer. I read a lot. I didn't tell him the truth either. I didn't want to rock the boat. If I told Dan, he'd tell Charlie, and Charlie would somehow make it all about herself. She'd get jealous or accuse me of trying to steal her thunder. I just wanted peace. I wanted to keep my two worlds walled off from each other. But secrets have a way of seeping through the cracks, especially when your two worlds are on a collision course. 2 weeks ago, my HR director, a sharp woman named Mary, walked into my office. "Alex," she said, "we found the perfect candidate for the senior project lead position. His resume is incredible. He's been at a top-tier firm in San Francisco, but he wants to relocate to Denver for family reasons." "Great," I said, not even looking up from the code on my monitor. "What's his name?" "Daniel Vaughn." I froze. My fingers hovered over the keys. "Daniel Vaughn?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes. Do you know him?" I leaned back in my chair, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. "He's my brother-in-law." Mary's eyes widened. "Oh, is that a conflict? Should we pass?" I thought about it. I thought about how smart Dan was. I thought about how he was the only person in my entire family who treated me like a peer. I thought about how exhausted he looked lately, hating his job in San Francisco and flying back and forth to see Charlie. "No," I said, my voice firm. "If he's the best candidate, you hire him. But Mary?" "Yes. Don't tell him I own the company. Not yet. Just say he's been hired by Apex Digital Systems. Let the official paperwork go through. I want him to take this job because he believes in the company, not because of me." "Understood," she said, nodding. So, Dan was hired. He started that past Monday. He spent the entire week at Apex, going through onboarding, meeting his new teams, getting settled into his new office. I stayed hidden in my office on the top floor. I avoided the common areas. I dodged the hallways where I might cross paths with him. I wanted to wait for the right time. I figured I'd tell him eventually, maybe take him out for a private lunch. I didn't plan for it to happen like this. I certainly didn't plan for the Friday night dinner. But looking back, maybe it had to happen this way. Maybe I needed that humiliation protocol as public, so raw, that the truth, when it finally came out, would feel like a weapon. I was the shadow sister, the one they always forgot, the one they always underestimated. But shadows can grow incredibly long when the light finally hits them from the right angle. And that night at the restaurant, the light was about to shift dramatically. Friday night rolled in with a cold drizzle, which was pretty typical for Denver in the fall. The restaurant my mother had picked was called the Sterling Spoon. It was one of those places with a leather-bound menu that conveniently forgot to list prices, and the lighting was so artfully dim you practically needed a flashlight to see your plate. It was pretentious, overpriced, and exactly the kind of place Charlie adored. I got there 5 minutes early and just sat in my car for a moment, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. I dreaded these dinners. I hated the whole performance of it all. We were supposed to act like a happy, supportive family, but it always felt more like walking into an ambush. I took a deep, shaky breath, glanced at my makeup in the rear view, and told myself to just survive. 2 hours. I I just had to get through 2 hours. When I walked inside, they were already at the table. Charlie, naturally, was holding court in the center, wearing a scarlet dress that was a bit too much for the restaurant's subdued vibe. But she wore it with her usual unshakable confidence. My mother sat to her left, my father across from her. Dan was seated next to Charlie, and he looked drained. "Finally," Charlie said as I approached, not bothering with a hello. She just tapped her watch. "We were about to order drinks without you." "I'm on time," I said quietly, sliding into the empty chair across from Dan. "The reservation was for 7. It's 7 o'clock." "Well, we've been here for 10 minutes, my mother said, daintily smoothing her napkin. "You know how your father gets anxious about ordering." "Hi, Alex," Dan said, offering me a small, genuine smile. It was the only real warmth at the entire table. "Hi, Dan. How was your week?" I asked, knowing full well how his week was. I knew he'd finished his entire onboarding module. I knew he was deeply impressed with the software architecture at Apex because I'd read his initial assessment reports. But I played my role. "It was interesting," Dan said, and a strange look flickered across his face. He glanced at me for a split second, then quickly looked away. "Started a new job. It's been a bit of a whirlwind." "Oh, the new job!" My mother clapped her hands together. "We are so proud of you, Dan. Finally working for a local company. No more of that awful commute." "Yes," Charlie chimed in, placing a hand on Dan's arm. It was a gesture that looked more possessive than affectionate. "It's much better for us. I need him around more to help with my video shoots. The lighting is getting so complicated now that autumn is here." Dan didn't respond. He just picked up the wine list and studied it intently. The waiter, a young man in a starched white shirt, came to take our drink orders. Charlie, of course, ordered a bottle of obscenely expensive champagne, insisting that we had to celebrate Dan's new chapter, even though she hadn't asked him a single thing about what he actually did there. Once the champagne was poured, the interrogation started, but it wasn't for everyone. It was just for me. "So, Alex," Charlie began, swirling her flute. Her voice was pitched just loud enough for the neighboring tables to overhear. "How are things in your little world?" I took a sip of water. "Things are good. Busy." "Busy doing what?" she pressed, a smirk playing on her lips. "Still fixing old laptops for your neighbors? Or have you graduated to troubleshooting printers?" My father let out a small chuckle. "Now, Charlie, don't be a tease. Work is work." "I'm not teasing," Charlie said, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "I worry about her. I mean, look at all of us. Dan has this amazing new career. I'm about to hit 75,000 followers next week, and Alex is, well, she's just sort of floating." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was that deep, primal shame. Even though I knew the truth, hearing her paint me as a failure, a charity case, still stung. It awakened that little girl inside me who just wanted her big sister to be kind. "I'm not floating," I said, my voice steady, but my hands were trembling under the table. "I have a career." "A career?" Charlie laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Sweetie, gig work isn't a career. It's what you do in between real careers." "Charlie," Dan said, his voice a low warning. "What?" Charlie looked at him, annoyed. "I'm just being honest. Someone has to be. Mom and Dad are too nice to say it, but we're all thinking it. Alex is 31 years old. She drives a 5-year-old sedan. She lives in that condo that's, let's be honest, a little shabby. We just want her to do better." My mother sighed, a long, dramatic sound. "We just want you to be settled, Alex, like your sister." "I am settled," I said, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. I pay all my own bills. I have my own life. But is it a life? Charlie asked, leaning forward. Or is it just existing? You know, I could probably get you a job as my assistant. The pay wouldn't be great, but you'd get to travel. You could carry my bags and take behind-the-scenes videos. The table went dead silent. The insult just hung there in the air, thick and suffocating. She wanted me to be her errand girl. I looked at my father. He was engrossed in the menu, refusing to make eye contact. He was letting it happen. He always let it happen. I looked at my mother. She was gazing at Charlie with pure adoration, as if she thought her daughter was making a magnanimous offer. "I don't want to be your assistant, Charlie," I said. "Suit yourself." Charlie leaned back, flashing that practiced smile again. She glanced around the room, making sure she still had an audience. "Dan, if you know what's good for you, you won't ask my sister about her career. She's still figuring life out." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Still figuring life out. The waiter had just returned with our appetizers, a platter of oysters and some bruschetta. He paused mid-stride, sensing the suffocating tension. He looked from me to Charlie, the awkwardness radiating off him. My mother took another sip of wine. My father adjusted his glasses. I felt a lump form in my throat. I wanted to cry, I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the entire table and walk out. But I didn't. I had spent years training myself to be a stone, to absorb the darkness so everyone else could have their light. But then something in the air at the table shifted. Dan cleared his throat. It was a loud, deliberate sound. The tension hummed like a high-voltage wire. He placed his menu decoratively on the table with a heavy thud. "Actually," Dan said, and his voice was crystal clear, cutting through the restaurant's ambient noise. "I think this conversation is about to get very interesting." Charlie laughed, but it was a nervous, uncertain sound this time. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She looked at Dan, expecting him to join in, to back her up in the family sport of picking on Alex. "Interesting?" she asked. "What do you mean?" Dan physically turned his body. He angled himself away from Charlie and looked directly at me. His eyes were apologetic, but they were also filled with a strange, newfound respect. He wasn't looking at me as his sister-in-law anymore. He was looking at me like a subordinate. "I mean," Dan said, his voice low and steady, "that you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, Charlie." My heart stopped. I looked at Dan and gave him the tiniest, almost imperceptible shake of my head. "Not now," I pleaded silently. "Or maybe, yes, now." Charlie's smile vanished. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Dan said. He was getting angry. I had never, ever seen him angry like this. "You're sitting here making a mockery of Alex. You're mocking her work. You're mocking her life. And you look like a complete and utter fool doing it." "Dan!" my mother gasped. "Don't you dare speak to your wife that way." "I'll speak to her with the truth," Dan snapped back. "Because it's pretty clear that no one else in this family gives a damn about the truth." He turned his gaze back to Charlie. The entire restaurant seemed to fall silent. The couple at the next table had stopped eating. The waiter took a nervous step backward, clutching his tray. "Maybe," Dan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "maybe I should just tell your family who signed my paycheck this morning." Forks clattered. My mom blinked, utterly confused. My dad froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Charlie just frowned. She looked from Dan to me and then back to Dan. She couldn't connect the dots. The very idea was so alien to her that her brain refused to process it. "What?" she asked, her voice small. "What are you talking about? Apex pays you. The company is called Apex Digital." She said the name, Apex, and then very slowly, All the color drained from her face. Dan gestured toward me, his hand open, as if presenting me to the table. "Yes," Dan said. "Apex, as in Alexandra Pierce. Your sister owns the company that just hired me, Charlie. She's the founder. She's the CEO. She's the person I now answer to. She's my boss." The silence that followed felt sacred. It was heavy, absolute. It was the sound of a world shattering and rearranging itself in real time. I just sat there, perfectly still. I took another long sip of water. The cool liquid soothed the fire in my chest. I looked at Charlie. Her mouth was hanging slightly open. Her eyes were wide, staring at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just waited, because the game was over. And for the first time in my life, I had won. The silence after Dan's announcement wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. It sucked all the air out of our little corner of the restaurant. I looked at the faces of the people who were supposed to be my family, and they looked like strangers, like people who had stumbled into the wrong movie and were desperately trying to piece together the plot. My mother was the first to react. She blinked several times, her hand fluttering to the pearl necklace at her throat. I don't understand, Daniel. What are you saying?" "It's English, Helen," Dan said, his voice bone dry. He picked up his wine glass but didn't drink, just held it like an anchor. "Alex owns Apex Digital Systems. She built it from the ground up. She runs it. She is the person I report to." "Apex Digital," my father repeated. He took off his glasses and began polishing them furiously with his napkin, a nervous habit he had whenever he was completely overwhelmed. "But I thought that was just a coincidence. The name, I mean. Pierce is a common name." "It's not a coincidence, Dad," I said. My voice was soft, but in that deafening silence it echoed like a gunshot. "It's my name. It's my company." Chloe let out a laugh. It was a horrible, high-pitched, jagged sound, completely devoid of any real humor. She looked around the table, her eyes darting between me and Dan, desperate for someone to let her in on the joke. "Okay, that's really funny," she said, reaching for her champagne. Her hand was shaking so much she knocked the glass, spilling some bubbly onto the white tablecloth. She ignored it. "You guys really had me going. Alex, a CEO? Come on." She looked at me with that old, familiar mix of pity and condescension. "Alex can barely manage to remember to bring the cranberry sauce for Thanksgiving." "I didn't forget it," I said calmly. "You told me you were bringing it." "Whatever." Chloe waved her hand dismissively. "The point is, this is absurd. Dan, stop teasing her. It's cruel." Dan turned on her, his voice low and intense, and Chloe physically recoiled. "I am not teasing, Charlie. I am deadly serious. I spent the last 5 days in orientation. I signed my employment contract on Tuesday. Do you have any idea whose signature is at the bottom of that contract?" Chloe just stared at him, her mouth agape. "It says Alexandra Pierce, president and founder," Dan said. "I've seen her office. It's the corner suite on the top floor, the one with the panoramic view of the mountains, the one you said you wished you had for your photo shoots." The color that had drained from Charlie's face didn't return. Instead, she turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like a decade. She wasn't seeing her struggling little sister anymore. She was seeing something foreign, something she didn't recognize. She was seeing a threat. "But," Charlie stammered, her voice cracking, "but she drives a sedan." "A Honda. Because she's smart with her money," Dan said pointedly, "unlike some people." "And she lives in that condo," Charlie argued, her voice rising in pitch. She was grasping at straws, desperately trying to reconstruct the world where she was the queen and I was the court jester. Rich people don't live in condos like that. I like my condo, I said. It's paid off. I don't have a mortgage. Paid off, my mother whispered the words as if they were a foreign language. The waiter, who had been frozen in place, finally decided to make his move. He crept forward nervously and placed the rest of the appetizers on the table, his hand shaking so much the oysters rattled on the plate. "Will there be anything else?" he squeaked. "No," my father said emphatically. "Give us a minute." The poor kid scurried away. I sat there feeling a strange lightness in my chest. For years, I had been carrying the crushing weight of their judgment, the burden of being the family disappointment. I had let them pile insecurities on my back, and now Dan had just taken that weight and thrown it right back at them, and I watched as they buckled under it. "So," I said, breaking the silence as I picked up a piece of bruschetta. "As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, work has been really busy. We're expanding into cloud security solutions next quarter. It's going to be a massive undertaking, but the profit margins are incredible." I took a bite and chewed slowly, deliberately. My father was just staring at me, looking like he was trying to solve a quantum physics problem in his head. "You have employees? Real employees?" 42 full-time staff, I said, and about 15 independent contractors. 42, my father breathed. That's a real business." "Yes, Dad," I said. "It is." "And you hired Dan?" my mother asked, looking at him obstaculous if he'd committed smire. "You knew about this all week and you didn't tell us?" "I found out on Monday," Dan said, "and I wanted to tell you. But then I saw how you treat her. I saw how you talked to her the second we walked in tonight, and I realized you don't deserve to know. You don't ask. You just assume." "We ask," Charlie protested weakly. "We ask her how she is all the time." "You ask so you can pivot the conversation back to yourself," Dan corrected. "There's a difference." Charlie slumped back in her chair, the fight draining out of her. The new reality was settling in like wet cement, hardening around her feet. She looked at her expensive dress, then at my simple blouse. She looked at her fancy champagne, then at my glass of water. She was realizing in real time that the entire hierarchy she had built her identity on was a complete fiction. "I need a drink," Charlie muttered. She drained her glass in one gulp and poured another, her hand shaking so badly the bottleneck clinked against the rim. I watched her, but I didn't feel triumphant anymore. I just felt clarity. This was my family. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and they were devastated, not because I'd been hurt, but because I was successful. My success was a mirror, and they hated the reflection staring back at them. The rest of the dinner was a masterclass in excruciating awkwardness. The food at the Sterling Spoon was supposed to be 5-star, but that night, it all tasted like ash. My mother was the one who couldn't let it go. She kept picking at the thread, trying to unravel the whole story, hoping to find some detail that would make her world make sense again. "But Alex," she said, leaning forward and ignoring her uneaten risotto. "How? I mean, how did you even start it? You never asked for money. You never asked your father for business advice." "I didn't need money," I said. "I saved. I worked 3 jobs through my 20s, which you all thought was just me floundering, and I poured every penny into the startup costs. And as for advice, I looked at my father. He was a retired car dealership manager, a good man in his own way, but he thought the internet was a passing fad until about 2012. "I figured it out myself," I said simply. "I read books. I took online courses. I learned by doing. But why didn't you tell us? My dad asked, and now there was a note of hurt in his voice. We're your parents. We would have been proud. I put down my fork and looked him dead in the eye. Would you have been? I asked. Of course, he insisted. We celebrate Charlie's success all the time. Exactly, I said. You celebrate Charlie because Charlie's success is loud and flashy. It's the kind of success you understand. It looks good. My success is boring to you. It's spreadsheets and server maintenance and HR protocols. Every single time I tried to talk about it, your eyes glazed over and you changed the subject. We did not, my mother huffed. Mom, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Last Thanksgiving, I tried to tell you that I'd just leased our new office space. You cut me off to ask Charlie if her new boots were real suede or faux. My mother opened her mouth to argue, then shut it. She looked down at her plate, a flush rheosome up her neck. She remembered. I just didn't think it mattered, I said, repeating the mantra that had been my shield for years. I figured if you didn't care about the small wins, you wouldn't care about the big ones unless I made a huge scene, and I've never liked making scenes. I glanced over at Charlie. She was staring at her phone, scrolling Bernamage, her usual defense mechanism. If she wasn't mentally present, she couldn't be humiliated. So, Charlie said, not looking up, her voice brittle. How much do you pay, Dan? I hope it's a competitive salary. We have bills. Charlie, my dad snapped, that is completely inappropriate. No, it's a fair question, Dan said, sounding amused now. She pays me 20% more than my last job in San Francisco, and the benefits package is way better. Full dental, full vision, and stock options. Stock options? Charlie's head shot up from her phone. The company has stock? It's a privately held company, I explained, but we have an equity sharing program for senior-level employees. If we ever go public or get acquired, Dan stands to do very well. Charlie's eyes did that calculating thing again. I could practically see the gears spinning. She was trying to figure out if this made her rich by association. She was trying to figure out if she could post about this. My husband, the powerful tech executive. Well, Charlie said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. That's great. Really. I'm happy for you, Dan. And for Alex? Dan prodded. Are you happy for her? Charlie looked at me. There was a war raging behind her eyes. Jealousy was wrestling with pragmatism. She knew on some level that she couldn't treat me like dirt anymore, not if I was the one signing her husband's checks. But she hated giving up the upper hand. Sure, she said, her voice flat. I'm surprised is all. You have to admit, Alex, you're incredibly secretive. You can't blame us for not knowing when you hide your entire life from us. I didn't hide, I said. I just stopped waving my arms, begging for attention. The check arrived. The waiter placed the black leather folder in the dead center of the table. Normally, this was a little dance. My dad would reach for it. Charlie would make a fake gesture to pay, knowing Dad would never let her. I would offer to split it, and they'd all say, No, Alex, you keep your money, you need it. Tonight, the folder just sat there. My father reached for it, but his hand was slow, hesitant. The entire dynamic had shifted so violently, he didn't know his role anymore. I reached out and took the folder. I've got it, I said. No, Alex, my mother said on autopilot. It's very expensive. Let your father... I opened the folder. The bill was just shy of $500. I pulled out my corporate credit card, a heavy black metal card that had a satisfying weight to it. I placed it in the folder and handed it to the hovering waiter. Put it on the company account, I told him. Then I looked directly at Charlie. market research. Since we spent so much of the evening discussing my career, it's a tax write-off. Charlie flinched. It was a petty move, I'll admit it. But after 31 years of being the little sister, the shadow, the charity case, it felt unbelievably good to buy their dinner with money I had earned while they were busy looking down on me. "Thank you, Alex," Dan said, raising his glass to me. "Yes," my dad mumbled. "Thank you, honey." My mother said nothing. She was too busy staring at the black card in the waiter's hand. When we walked out of the restaurant, the rain had stopped. The air was crisp and clean. The valet brought Charlie's car around, a leased luxury SUV they were struggling to make payments on. Then he brought my car, my reliable 5-year-old sedan. Charlie looked at my car. Usually she'd make a crack about it. Still driving that old thing? Tonight she just looked at it with a new suspicion, as if the car itself was part of the lie. "Drive safe," I said. "See you Monday, boss," Dan said, giving me a quick wink. I got into my car and shut the door, sealing out the city noise. I gripped the steering wheel and took a long, deep breath. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline dump. It was over. The secret was out. The shadow sister was gone. I started the engine and pulled into traffic. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove, listening to the hum of the tires on the wet pavement. I felt a pang of loneliness, yes, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I thought the hard part was over. I thought the big reveal was the climax of the story. I was so wrong. The reveal was just the inciting incident. The real drama was just getting started. Because now that they knew I had something, they were all going to want a piece of it. I was only about 5 blocks from the restaurant when my phone rang. The name flashed on my car's dashboard display, Charlie. My stomach instantly clenched. It was a conditioned reflex, a physical response I'd had for 2 decades. A call from Charlie always meant one of 2 things. She needed something, or she was furious about something. There was no such thing as a just checking in call from my sister. I considered letting it go to voicemail. I could just keep driving, go home, take a scalding hot shower, and wash the whole night off me. But I knew if I ignored it, she'd call Mom. Then Mom would call me. Then Dad would send a concerned text. It would turn into a multi-front war. I pressed the button on my steering wheel. "Hello?" I said, my voice intentionally calm, knowing it would infuriate her. "You did that on purpose," Charlie hissed. "No hello, no, are you driving?" Just a straight-up accusation. "I did what on purpose, Charlie?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the slick road. "You set me up!" Her voice was shrill, vibrating Nepriatno through the car's speakers. "You sat there all night, letting me talk, You made me look like a complete idiot. You and Dan planned this, I know you did. You wanted to humiliate me in front of Mom and Dad." I flicked on my signal for a left turn. The rhythmic tick-tock of the blinker was a grounding sound. "I didn't plan anything, Charlie," I said. "Dan got a job. I gave him a job. You were the one who decided to turn a family dinner into a public roast of my entire life." "You could have told me," she screamed. "You could have sent me a text. Hey, by the way, I'm Dan's new boss." But no, you waited. You waited until the restaurant was packed. You waited until I was talking about my career so you could just pull the rug out from under me. I pulled the car over to the curb. I couldn't drive and have this conversation at the same time. I put the car in park and leaned my head back against the headrest. "I waited," I said slowly, "because I was hoping you would stop on your own." "Stop what?" "Stop belittling me. Stop treating me like I'm 5 years old. Stop acting like your life is the only one that has any value." I took a breath. "I gave you 3 chances tonight, Charlie. 3 separate times I tried to change the subject. 3 times I said I was busy with work. You didn't listen. You never listen. Oh, so now you're the victim? Charlie let out a laugh, but it was a wet, choked sound like she was crying. You embarrassed me, Alex. You made me look stupid in front of my own husband, in front of our parents. Do you have any idea how that feels? Yes, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I do, because you have done it to me, consistently, for my entire life. There was a shocked silence on the other end of the line. I had never, ever talked back to her like this. I had never held a mirror up to her behavior. Charlie stammered. That's different. I was just trying to motivate you. I push you because I want you to be better. No, I said, my voice unwavering. You push me down because it makes you feel taller. But I'm not short anymore, Charlie. I own a successful company. I have employees who depend on me and respect me. I have a life that is full and real, and I am done apologizing for it. You think you're better than me now, don't you? She accused, just because you have some money. It was never about the money, I said. It's about respect. You demanded respect tonight because you have a certain number of followers. Dan gave me respect because of my work. See the difference? You embarrassed me, she repeated, her voice cracking. It was the only card she had left to play. She was trying to guilt me back into my box. I looked out the window at the rain, which had started again, blurring the streetlights into soft, hazy streaks. I felt a deep, profound sadness, but not an ounce of guilt. No, Charlie, I said. You embarrassed yourself. I braced myself for the explosion, for the screaming, but it didn't come. She just breathed, ragged and heavy, into the phone. You mocked something you never bothered to understand, I continued promotion. You made an assumption that I was nothing because I was quiet. That was your mistake, not mine. I'm hanging up, she said abruptly. Okay, I said. Good night. The line went dead. I sat there in my dark, silent car for a long time. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I replayed the conversation in my mind. I had said everything that needed to be said. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't resorted to name-calling. I had simply stated facts. For years, I had been terrified of this exact moment, terrified of Charlie's wrath. I thought that if I ever truly stood up to her, my world would implode. I thought my family would cast me out. But the world was still spinning. The rain was still falling. My car was still running. I put the car back in drive and headed home, to my condo. My quiet, peaceful, paid-off condo. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up, checking my phone, expecting a barrage of angry texts from my parents. I expected my dad to tell me I was being too hard on my sister. I expected my mom to demand that I fix this. But my phone remained dark. Saturday came and went in silence. Sunday came and went in silence. It was the loudest silence I had ever experienced. It meant they were talking to each other, just not to me. They were circling the wagons, trying to figure out how to rewrite the family narrative. I spent the weekend working. I went over the quarterly financials for Apex. I prepared the agenda for the Monday morning all-hands meeting. Usually work was my escape. This weekend, it felt different. It felt like my armor. I realized my company wasn't just a business. It was the one place on earth where I was judged solely on my merits, not on my family history. It was the one place where Alexandra Pierce meant leader, not little sister. By Sunday night, the anxiety had faded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I knew Monday would be a new test. I knew Dan would be there. I knew the family drama could easily bleed into my professional life if I wasn't careful. But I also knew, for the first time, that I was ready for it. Monday morning at Apex Digital Systems was always a hive of activity, but this Monday felt supercharged. I walked into the office at 7:30 a.m., same as always. I greeted Sarah at the front desk, grabbed my coffee, and headed for my office. The glass walls of my office gave me a clear view of the main floor. I watched as the developers and project managers trickled in, settling at their desks, the low hum of productivity beginning to build. At 8 a.m., I saw Dan walk in. He looked different here than he did at family dinners. He wore a sharp button-down shirt, no tie, and carried a messenger bag. He walked with a sense of purpose. He wasn't Charlie's husband here. He was Dan Vaughn, senior project lead. He stopped at a few desks, introducing himself to team members he hadn't met yet. He was charming, professional, engaged. I watched him for a moment and felt a wave of relief. He was going to be great at this. My personal feelings hadn't clouded my professional judgment. Around 10 a.m., I was deep into a contract review when there was a soft knock on my door. "Come in," I called. Dan stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. He took a seat in the chair opposite my desk. "Morning, boss," he said, a small, wry smile on his lips. "Good morning, Dan," I replied. "How's the first official Monday treating you?" "Good. The team is fantastic. The code base is cleaner than I ever would have expected." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, about Friday." I held up a hand. "You don't need to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," he said, "but the weekend was intense." "I can only imagine," I said. "How is she?" "A mess," Dan admitted frankly. "She spent all of Saturday in bed, crying. Then on Sunday she was rage cleaning the entire house. She keeps waiting for you to call and apologize." I leaned back in my chair. "She's going to be waiting a very long time." "Good," Dan said. I looked at him, surprised. "Good?" "Yeah, good," he sighed. "Alex, I have watched her treat you like a doormat for 5 years. I tried to step in a couple of times, but you always waved me off. You always just took it. Friday night was the first time I've ever seen you actually push back. She needs that. She needs to realize she can't just bulldoze people." "My parents don't see it that way," I said quietly. "No," Dan agreed. "They don't." As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced down, a text message notification. It was from Mom. I felt that familiar spike of adrenaline. The conditioning ran deep. "Speak of the devil," I muttered. I picked up the phone and opened the message. "Alex, your sister is extremely hurt. She's been crying all weekend. We know about your success now, but that's no excuse to be cruel. Can you please call her and apologize? We need to move past this as a family." I stared at the screen, the words blurring. Cruel, apologize, move past this. It was the family script, recited verbatim. Whenever Charlie was upset, it was everyone else's job to manage her feelings. If Charlie broke a lamp, it was because someone put it in a bad spot. If Charlie was rude, it was because she was stressed. If Charlie's feelings were hurt, it was because I was being cruel. I felt that heavy, familiar weight settle in my gut. The instinct to fix it, to smooth it over, was so strong. I could just text Charlie. I could say, "I'm sorry things got out of hand." We could go back to our version of normal. But normal meant I was the designated punching bag. Normal meant I swallowed my pride so Charlie wouldn't have to confront hers. I handed the phone to Dan. "Read this." Dan took the phone and read the message, then read it again. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Unbelievable," he said. "She publicly humiliates you, mocks your life, insults your career, and you're the one who's supposed to apologize." "That's how it works," I said. "It's the Pierce family reflex. Protect Charlie at all costs. Dan handed the phone back to me, his expression serious. You're not just her sister anymore, Alex, he said. You're a CEO. You make tough calls every single day. You fire people who are a toxic fit for the company culture. You negotiate hardline contracts. Why is it so hard to negotiate for yourself? He was right. I looked at the phone again, at my mother's words. Can you please call her and apologize? I thought about all the years of being dismissed. I thought about the dinner. I thought about telling Chloe, you embarrassed yourself. If I apologized now, I would undo everything. I would be telegraphing to them that my success didn't matter, my feelings didn't matter, and that Charlie was and always would be the center of their universe. I wasn't willing to do that, not anymore. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed slowly, deliberately. Mom, I did nothing wrong. Charlie insulted me repeatedly, and I finally told her the truth about my life. I will not apologize for standing up for myself. Respect is a two-way street. If she wants to have an adult conversation, my door is open, but I am not apologizing. I read it over. It was blunt, it was direct, it was honest. You going to send it? Dan asked. Yes, I said. Do it, he said. Set the boundary. I hit send. The little blue bubble swooshed away. I placed the phone face down on my desk. My hand was shaking, but not from fear this time. It was from the release of a lifetime of tension. I had drawn a line in the sand. You okay? Dan asked. I think so, I said, taking a deep breath. Actually, I feel lighter. Good, Dan said, standing up. Now about that cloud security expansion you mentioned at dinner. Are we really doing that? I smiled. He was changing the subject, bringing it back to business. He was treating me like his boss. Yes, I said, we are, and I want you to lead the initial feasibility study. On it, he said. He walked to the door, then paused. Hey, Alex. Yeah? I'm proud of you, he said, and not just because you're my boss now. He closed the door behind him. I sat alone in my office, watching the morning sun glint off the neighboring buildings. I knew there would be fallout from that text. I knew my mother would call my father, and they'd fret about how hard I'd become. They'd probably say the money had changed me. But it wasn't the money that had changed me. It was the truth. I got back to work. I had a company to run. And for the first time, I realized that my company wasn't just a business. It was my sanctuary. It was the one place I was safe from them. But sanctuaries are meant to be tested. I didn't know it then, but the biggest test was coming. Charlie wasn't just crying in bed anymore. Reality was about to hit her like a freight train. And when reality hits someone like Charlie, they get desperate. And desperate people do very strange things, like applying for a job at the company they just finished mocking. Tuesday started like any other day. The sky was a crisp, clear blue. I had a 9 a.m. development meeting and a 10:30 a.m. call with a new vendor. I was in my element, focused. The family drama felt a million miles away, locked outside the glass doors of my office. Around 11 a.m., my assistant, Sarah, knocked on my door. Sarah is 24, wickedly smart, and normally unshakable. But today, she looked baffled. She was holding a tablet, a slight frown on her face. Alex, she said, I have something weird. I looked up from my monitor. Weird how? Did a server crash? No, she said. It's a job application. It just came through the online portal this morning for the social media manager position we posted last month. Okay, I said, turning back to my work. We get dozens of those a day. What's the issue? The applicant's name, Sarah said, is Charlotte Pierce Vaughn. My fingers froze over the keyboard. The hum of the server room down the hall suddenly seemed deafening. I looked at Sarah to see if this was some kind of joke. but her expression was dead serious. "Charlie applied for a job here?" I asked, my voice flat. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "She listed you and Daniel Vaughn as references." I just sat back in my chair, completely stunned. I tried to process the sheer audacity of it. Just 4 days ago, Charlie had sat in a restaurant and told me I was still figuring life out. She had mocked my career. She had treated me like a pathetic failure. And now she was applying for a job at my company. "Is Dan around?" I asked. "He's in the break room," Sarah said. "Send him in, please." 2 minutes later, Dan walked in, holding a mug of coffee. He took one look at my face, and his smile faded. "What happened?" he asked. "Did your mom text you again?" "Worse," I said. "Charlie applied for a job." Dan blinked. He took a sip of his coffee, then slowly lowered the mug. "What?" "She applied for the social media manager role," I said. "This morning." Dan stared at me for a solid 3 seconds, and then he threw his head back and roared with laughter. It was a loud, genuine, booming laugh that echoed off the glass walls. He had to set his coffee mug on my desk because he was shaking. "You have got to be kidding me," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. That is priceless." "Why would she do that?" I asked, genuinely bewildered. "She hates me right now. She thinks I'm a monster who humiliated her." Dan shook his head. "Alex, you have to understand how Charlie's brain works. It's all about survival, instinct, and ego. She sees that I'm happy here. She sees that you have money and power. She sees that this is a real, legitimate operation, and she's terrified of being left behind." He paused, his expression turning serious. "Plus what?" "Plus, we're broke," Dan said bluntly. "Her credit cards are maxed out. The influencer money has all but dried up. She needs a job. And in her mind, she thinks because you're her sister, this is the easy button. She thinks she can just waltz in here and you'll hand her a 6-figure salary." I looked at the tablet Sarah had left on my desk and pulled up the application. There it was. Charlotte Pierce Vaughn. Under experience, she had listed personal brand management and lifestyle curation. Under reason for leaving current role, she had written, seeking new and exciting challenges. It was delusional, it was arrogant, it was pure, unadulterated Charlie. "What are you going to do?" Dan asked. "You could just delete it. No one would blame you." I stared at the screen. The old me, the shadow sister, would have deleted it in a heartbeat to avoid the confrontation. But then I thought about Friday night. I thought about all the years of small and large humiliations. I thought about how she had never in her entire life been held accountable for her actions. If I just rejected her application, she'd spin it. She would tell our parents I was being petty and vindictive, that I was blocking her from a job out of spite. No, that was the old way of doing things. "Sarah," I called out. Sarah poked her head back into my office. "Yes?" "Schedule her for an interview," I said. Sarah's eyebrows shot up to her hairline. "Are you sure?" "Positive," I said. "Bring her in tomorrow at 2 p.m. and treat her exactly like any other candidate. Send her the standard automated confirmation email." "You're actually going to interview her?" Dan asked, looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. "I'm not going to give her a job," I said calmly. "I'm going to give her a reality check." Dan smiled slowly. "Poetic justice," he said. "I'll make sure to be deep in the server room when she arrives. I don't want to miss the show, but I also value my marriage." "Get back to work, Dan," I said, a small smile playing on my own lips. "Yes, boss." I spent the rest of the day preparing. I didn't prepare by thinking of cutting remarks. I prepared by printing out her resume. I prepared by highlighting the gaping holes in her skill set. I prepared to treat her exactly as she had asked to be treated, as a professional. Silence can teach, I thought, but reality is the final exam, and Charlie was about to take the hardest test of her life. Wednesday afternoon, 1:55 p.m. I was sitting in the main conference room, a glass-walled fishbowl in the center of the open plan office. I chose it on purpose. I wanted her to see the scale of it all. I wanted her to see the people, the energy, the reality of what I had built. I saw her walk in through the main glass doors. She was dressed for a magazine cover, not a tech company interview. She wore a pristine cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my first car, paired with stilettos that clicked loudly on the polished concrete floors. She had a designer handbag slung over her arm and wore oversized sunglasses, which she removed with a dramatic flourish as she approached Sarah at the reception desk. She looked completely out of place. My employees were in smart, casual attire, jeans, sweaters, button-downs. They were focused, working. Charlie looked like she was on her way to a boozy brunch. I watched as Sarah greeted her and led her toward the conference room. Charlie was smiling, but her eyes were scanning everything, critically assessing the furniture, the lighting, the brand of coffee maker in the kitchen. She wasn't nervous. She was appraising. Sarah opened the door. "Ms. Pierce will see you now." Charlie breezed in. "Thanks, sweetie." She walked to the large oak table and set her bag down, then looked at me and let out a breathless little laugh. "Okay," she said. "This is super weird. Should I call you Alex or Miss Pierce?" She sat down without waiting to be invited. "Hello, Charlie," I said, my voice perfectly neutral, professional. "Thank you for coming in." "Oh, come on, Alex," she said, waving her hand. "You can drop the whole CEO act. It's just me." I got the email and I thought, okay, she wants to play it by the book. I can play along. But seriously, this place is really nice, way better than I imagined. "I'm glad you like it," I said. "I have your resume here." I slid the piece of paper across the table toward her. It was covered in my red ink annotations. Charlie looked at it, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What's this?" "This is an interview, Charlie," I said. "You applied for the social media manager position. It's a senior-level role that requires managing a monthly budget of over $15,000, analyzing complex data metrics, and leading a team of 3 junior marketing associates." Charlie shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her practiced smile began to falter. "Right. Well, you know I'm like an expert at social media. I have almost 75,000 followers." "I know," I said. "But a personal brand is very different from corporate B2B strategy. I see here you have no experience with Google Analytics, HubSpot, or Salesforce Marketing Cloud. Is that correct?" I use the Instagram Insights tool," she said defensively. "That's not the same," I said, Ping Jingdi. "We use complex attribution modeling for our clients. We need to be able to measure ROI on significant ad spend. Do you have any experience with managing paid advertising campaigns on platforms other than Instagram?" "No, but I'm a fast learner," she said, leaning forward. "Alex, look. I know we had a fight, and I know you're still mad, but I really need this job. Dan said the benefits are amazing. I can help you. I can make this company look cooler." "I don't need cool, Charlie," I said. "I need competent." The word just hung there in the air between us. Competent. "Are you saying I'm incompetent?" she asked, her voice rising, a familiar note of indignation creeping in. "I'm saying you are completely unqualified for this specific position," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You don't have the skills or the experience we require. If I hired you for this role, you would fail." and then I would have to fire you. And that would be far more humiliating for you than this conversation." Charlie just stared at me, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. "So that's it? You just brought me in here to humiliate me again? To wave your power in my face?" "No," I said. "You came here, Charlie. You filled out the application. You walked through those doors." "I thought you would just hire me," she snapped. "We're family. That's what family is for." "No," I said. "That's what our family is for. That's what Mom and Dad do for you. They give you things. They smooth the path, but this is my company. I built this path brick by painful brick, and on this path, there are no shortcuts." I looked her directly in the eye, and I did not look away. "Do you want a job here?" I asked. "Because I do have an opening. I'm hiring for a front desk coordinator. It pays $22 an hour. You'd answer phones, greet clients, and manage the mail. If you do that job well for 6 months, we can discuss opportunities for advancement." Charlie's jaw dropped. "A receptionist? You want me to be a receptionist? It's the only role in this company you're currently qualified for," I said with brutal honesty. "And it's an honest job. Sarah started there. Now she's my executive assistant." Charlie shot to her feet, grabbing her expensive handbag. Her hands were shaking. "I can't believe you," she whispered. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "No, I'm not," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I'm actually incredibly sad, Charlie. I'm sad that you believe you are entitled to a job you didn't earn. I'm sad that you see my years of hard work as something you can just borrow for your convenience." Charlie stopped. She looked down at the table. For a fleeting moment, the mask slipped. The arrogant influencer persona vanished, and all I saw was a scared woman who was just beginning to realize that her charm and beauty had an expiration date. "I didn't realize," she said, her voice trembling. "Didn't realize what?" "That I hurt you that much," she said, looking up at me. There were tears in her eyes, real tears this time. I thought that was our thing. I'm the star. You're the support system. I didn't know you hated it so much." "I don't hate you, Charlie," I said. "I just outgrew the dynamic." She swallowed hard, looking at the door, then back at me. "I can't be a receptionist," she said softly. The embarrassment would kill me." "That's your choice," I said. "But the offer is real. If you want to work, to actually work, the door is open. But you start at the bottom, just like I did, just like everyone else here did." She nodded slowly. She wiped at her eye, careful not to smudge her makeup. "I'm going to go," she said. "Okay," I said. "Goodbye, Charlie." She walked out of the conference room. She didn't strut this time. She walked quickly, her head down. She didn't look at any of the employees. She just wanted to get out. I watched her go, and I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't victory. It was closure. I had finally treated her like an adult, and in doing so, I had finally freed myself from being treated like a child. That evening, the office was quiet. The staff had gone home. The cleaning crew was running vacuums in the hallway. I was packing up my briefcase when Dan knocked on my door. Hey, I saw her leave," Evan said. "She looked different, quiet." "We had a talk," I said. "A real one." "Did you hire her?" "I offered her the receptionist position," I said. Dan's eyes widened. "Bold move. Did she take it?" "No," I said. "Her pride wouldn't let her, not yet anyway." Dan nodded, walking over to the window to look out at the city lights. "She called me about an hour ago. She was crying, but it sounded different. She wasn't yelling about you, she just sounded sad." She said she felt stupid. She's not stupid, I said. She's just never had to try before. I think you broke the spell, Dan said, turning to look at me. The spell that said she was special and everyone else was just lucky to be in her orbit. You shattered it. I didn't do it to be cruel, I said. I did it because I couldn't breathe anymore. I know, Dan said. So, how do you feel? Do you feel like you won? I thought about it. I thought about the years of being the invisible sister. I thought about the dinner. I thought about the look on Charlie's face when I slid that annotated resume across the table. Did I win? Winning implies a game. Winning implies I was trying to beat her. I was never trying to beat her. I just wanted to be seen. No, I said. I don't feel like I won. I feel peaceful. Peaceful is better, Dan said. Victory is loud. Peace is quiet. Exactly, I said. We walked out of the building together. The air outside was cool and smelled of rain. The city was alive with traffic and people, all going about their own lives. She might come back, you know, Dan said as we reached the parking garage. In a few weeks, when the bills really start piling up, she might just take that receptionist job. If she does, I said, I'll interview her again. Dan laughed. You're tough, Alex. I had to be, I said. I got into my car, my sensible, reliable sedan. I watched Dan walk to his own car. I thought about my parents. I knew they'd be calling. I knew the drama wasn't over. Not really. Family patterns are hard to break. But as I started my engine, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer the victim in my own story. I wasn't waiting for their permission to be successful. I wasn't waiting for their apology to feel whole. I had built my own life, brick by brick, in the silence. And now that the silence was broken, I knew my foundation was strong enough to hold me up. I pulled out of the parking garage and merged into the flow of traffic. The road ahead was clear. The streetlights were guiding me home. I didn't need revenge. Revenge is a sugar high that leaves you feeling empty. What I had now was better. I had boundaries. I had self-respect. And for the first time in 31 years, I was driving my own car, on my own road, toward a destination of my own making. And that was more than enough.